Frost had locked the high desert outside Burns, Oregon, since before dawn, and the temperature at the Cord farm on the ridge above Malheur Lake had not cleared 10 degrees by the time Sergeant Dominic Vale slowed his truck on the county road at 9:30 on a January morning. In the passenger seat, Colt stood up. Not slowly, all at once, the way dogs stand when something they already know is about to be confirmed. He pressed his nose to the window and made no sound at all, which was the thing about Colt that Dominic had learned to read the way other people read alarms. The dog's silence, in moments like this, was louder than anything he could have barked. Smoke was coming from the barn chimney, not the farmhouse chimney. The barn. What Colt found on the floor of that barn would bring Dominic Vale back to a debt he had been carrying for 6 years, to a man who had sheltered him when he had no right to ask for shelter, and to a wrong that had been done to that man quietly and patiently over 3 seasons, while he refused to ask anyone for help. This channel is where those stories get told. If you're new here, subscribe and stay with me for this one. Dominic Vale was 31 years old and had been back in Burns for 8 months with no particular plan for what came next. He had done 2 tours with the 3rd Marine Regiment out of Camp Pendleton, Helmand Province. Both times, the second one longer than the first, in the way that the second of anything hard is always longer, and he had come back to Oregon in May with a discharge paper, a duffel bag. A yellow Labrador, he had agreed to take on the recommendation of a counselor who said he needed something that depended on him, and a relationship with the night that was not healthy, and that he was aware was not healthy, and that he had not yet found the way to address. It drank on the bad nights. Not to the point of catastrophe, not anymore, not since the night 6 years ago outside Burns that he did not discuss, but enough. He had been staying at a friend's empty hunting cabin on the edge of town since August, paying the utilities and keeping the place in order, and he had not called his mother in 6 weeks. And he knew this, and was not proud of it, and was doing it anyway, which was the particular shape of where he was. He had a counselor in Portland. He was supposed to call on Tuesdays. He called about half the time. The other half, he drove the high desert roads, with Colt in the truck, and the radio low and the sage flats going past. And he told himself he was working up to the call, which was a thing he told himself that was partially true. Colt was a 5-year-old yellow Labrador, 74 pounds, with a temperament that had been shaped by 3 years of VA therapy work before the Portland Center's program was cut. It was not a dramatic dog, no particular heroics in his history, no combat deployment, no trained detection sequence. What he had was a constitutional inability to leave a person in distress. It was not trained behavior. Dominic had watched it happen 3 times now in 8 months. A man at a bus stop in Bend who was crying quietly into his collar. A woman in a parking lot in Burns who was sitting on the asphalt beside her car at 2 in the morning in a way that was not casual. And Dominic himself on the bad nights, when Colt would come from the foot of the bed and press himself against Dominic's side with the full commitment of a dog who has decided this is where he is meant to be and is not taking arguments. The counselor had been right about the dog. Dominic had driven past the Cord farm on his 2nd week back in Burns. It had slowed to 5 miles an hour and looked at the mailbox. A Cord. Route 4, same painted letters he remembered from 6 years ago, and he had kept going. He had told himself he would stop next week. He had told himself this for 8 months. He had been slowing to 5 miles an hour on Route 4 every time his work took him near it, and not stopping, and feeling the specific weight of a debt that accumulates interest when you leave it unaddressed. He knew about the farm from 6 days inside it in November 6 years ago. He had been driving back from a night in Burns after his first homecoming, going too fast in rain on a county road he didn't know well enough, and the road had given way under him, and he had gone into the ditch. He wasn't hurt badly. Cut forehead, bruised ribs, shaken, but he was in no condition to be discovered by anyone official. He had sat in the ditch until dawn, in the rain, which was a thing a man does when he has made choices he would rather not explain. Elias Cord had found him at first light. He had pulled Dominic out of the ditch with the specific efficiency of a man who has been doing the physical work of agriculture for 50 years, and for whom pulling a 200-pound person out of a ditch is a practical problem, not an emotional one. He had not asked what happened. He had driven Dominic back to the farmhouse, made coffee, set food in front of him, and let him sleep in the room at the top of the stairs. that had been his wife Miriam's craft room, and that smelled of dried lavender and oil paint in the way of rooms that absorbed the people who used them. The road had been locked by weather for 6 days. Every morning, Elias made breakfast and they ate at the kitchen table and talked. Not about the ditch, not about the drinking, not about Helmand province, or any of the things that had been grinding on Dominic since he came home. They talked about the farm, about wheat prices, and pasture management, and the particular temperament of the high desert in winter, how it demanded a specific kind of patience from the people who chose to live on it. They talked about the Marines. Elias had served 1st Marine Division, 1966 to 1968. Andes spoke about it the way men speak about the thing that made them when they have had 50 years to understand what it made them. Not glorifying, just true. On the 6th morning, when the road cleared, Elias had shaken Dominic's hand at the door and said, "You've got more in you than last week showed. Go prove it." Dominique had driven away. He had gone back to the base, re-enlisted, done the second tour, come home a second time. He had been trying to prove it ever since. He had not come back to tell the man whether he had succeeded. He had not stopped on Route 4 in 8 months. Today, the smoke was coming from the wrong chimney, and Colt was already at the window. It turned down the farm road without deciding to. Colt had the door open before the truck was fully stopped. Not literally, but close, pressing at the handle with the focused energy of a dog who has already arrived at a conclusion. Dominique got out and unclipped him, and Colt went directly to the barn. Not at a run, but at the purposeful, even pace of a dog who knows where the person is and is going to them. Dominique followed. The barn was a working barn, the kind that has been added to over 50 years until it is more accumulation than architecture. Ice storage, equipment bays, a small heated room in the back corner with a wood stove that Elias used in winter for equipment repair, and Dominique would later understand, for the mornings when the farmhouse felt too large. The stove was going. The heat was thin and industrial, cut through with cold from the gap in the big door that Colt had pushed through. Elias Court was on the floor beside the workbench. It was conscious. His eyes were open, and they found Dominique's immediately with the direct look of a man who had been waiting to see what was going to happen next and was now assessing the development. It was still there, 84 years old, white-haired, his face the specific weathering of a man who has spent 60 years outside in Oregon, high desert wind. And he was on the floor of his barn in January, and his hip had given out when he tried to stand after a half hour of fence repair in 10-degree cold. And his heart had done the thing it had been doing more frequently in the past year, that his doctor called a warning and that Elias called a management problem. Colt went to him. He lay down against Elias's side the way he lay down against Dominic's on the bad nights, fully, without ceremony. The full weight of 74 pounds of yellow Labrador pressed against a man who needed warmth and something to hold on to. And Elias put one hand on the dog's back, and his breathing changed. "Vale," he said. His voice was rough but steady. "I wondered when you'd stop." Dominic crouched beside him. "Let me check." "I'm not dying," Elias said. "I fell. The hip went. Give me a minute." "Your heart." A pause. That was its own answer. "Give me a minute," Elias said again. Dominic gave him the minute. He sat on the barn floor in the thin warmth of the wood stove, with an 84-year-old man he owed a debt to, and Colt between them, and the January cold pressing at the door. And he thought, 6 years. He was here the whole time. I just didn't stop. It called 911 from outside the barn where the signal was better, and he told the dispatcher what he had and where he was. Andy went back inside and sat with Elias until the ambulance came. "Do you know someone like Elias? Someone who helped you when they didn't have to? Who asked nothing in return? And whom you've been meaning to go back and thank, but kept finding reasons not to stop? If that person came to mind just now, tell me about them in the comments. They deserve to be remembered." The paramedics said it was not a cardiac event, arrhythmia brought on by cold and exertion, the hip a separate problem. They took Elias to Burns District Hospital for monitoring. And Dominic followed in his truck with Colt in the passenger seat and the fence repair tools from the barn in the bed because he had picked them up without thinking about it. He picked them up because he had seen the fence line from the barn door, and what he had seen was not an old break or weather damage. The wire had been cut. 3 posts in sequence, clean diagonal cuts at the base of the staples, tool marks, not wear marks. The fence ran along the boundary between the court property and the neighboring Hester operation to the south. And the cut posts had been standing all winter. Their wire dropped into the snow, a section of south pasture exposed to drift and wind, and whatever else the season sent through. Beside the last cut post, in the frozen mud where the ground was sheltered by a rise, there were tire tracks, recent within the last 72 hours, given the frost pattern. And on the post itself, caught on a staple, a pair of fencing pliers with a yellow handle, not Elias's. Elias kept red-handled tools. He was particular about it. Dominic photographed everything with his phone. He photographed the tire tracks. He photographed the pliers. He did not take the pliers. He left them exactly where they were. At the hospital, Elias was sitting up in a bed in the observation unit, looking like a man who found the entire situation professionally insulting, and Dominic sat in the chair beside him, and they talked. Not about the fence line, not yet. About the tour, Elias asked, and Dominic answered, which was the first time in 8 months Dominic had answered those questions to anyone without feeling like he was being examined. Elias listened the way he had listened 6 years ago at the kitchen table, without agenda, without the particular attentiveness of a person who is deciding how to respond. He listened, like the question of what to do with what he heard had already been settled, and what remained was just to hear it. At some point in the hour, Elias said, Vale, that's an Oregon name. And Dominic said his grandfather's name. And Elias went still in the way that people go still when the world has folded something back on itself, in a way they recognized but did not expect. He sighed. Your grandfather served with the 1st Division, 67-68. I knew Aveli from Medford. He looked at Dominic. Your grandfather have a brother. He did. He had. The two men sat with that for a while. Colt on the floor between the chair and the bed. And outside the window, the high desert was white and cold and going nowhere. If you were sitting in that hospital room right now, having just found Elias on the barn floor and seen the cut fence line and picked up someone else's pliers, would you have let it go? Type yes or no in the comments. I read every one. Dominic called the Harney County Sheriff's Office from the hospital parking lot and spoke to a deputy named Frank Okafor, who had been on the Rural Property Crimes Desk for 11 years, and who, when Dominic described the fence line and the tire tracks and the yellow-handled pliers, was quiet for a moment, and then said, that's the 3rd complaint on that boundary line this year. We haven't had a complainant willing to go on record. You do now, Dominic said. He spent the afternoon making calls. He called a range management officer at the county extension office, a woman named Cass, who agreed to document the fence damage and the ditch diversion before the next weather system moved in. He called the extension office's water rights division about the irrigation ditch on the south end of the property, and learned that a complaint had been filed 8 months ago by someone, not Elias, about the same ditch, and had been closed for lack of follow-up. It drove back to the farm at dusk with Colt and walked the south fence line and the last of the January light, and photographed the ditch where the diversion had been made, a simple cut in the bank, the kind that looks like natural erosion until you look at the angle of the cut and the freshness of the soil on the edges. He photographed 4 more cut posts. He photographed 2 places where the fence wire had been rolled back from the roadside, the kind of thing that lets cattle drift without looking like anything official. He texted the photographs to Frank Okafor. Frank texted back one line, I'll get a warrant for Hester's property records tomorrow morning. Boyd Hester came to the farm the following day. He came in the morning, when the frost was still on the ground, and he came in the particular manner of a man who has been making visits to this property for 3 years and has developed a routine of them. He had seen Dominic's truck in the yard, which he had not expected, and he came anyway because 3 years of patience had made him confident, and confidence had made him incautious. He walked up the front porch steps and knocked on the door. Dominique opened it. Boyd Hester was in his mid-50s, a large man in a ranch coat, with a kind of face that has been outdoors in Oregon wind for 20 years and has developed a set to it. He looked at Dominic with the expression of a man recalibrating an expected landscape, and he said, with the ease of long practice, didn't know Elias had company. Who's checking in? Heard he had a medical situation. Come in, Dominic said. He stepped back from the door. Boyd came into the front room and found Elias in his chair by the window. Elias had been home from the hospital for one night and was moving carefully, but he was upright and he was present. And the look he directed at Boyd Hester when Boyd came through the door was the look of a man who has known something for 2 years and has been waiting with varying degrees of patience for the right moment to say it. He found Frank Okafor near the fireplace with a notepad. He found Cass from the extension office at the kitchen table with a documentation folder. He found a woman in a wool coat sitting at the end of the couch, Reverend Ada Stills, who had been Miriam's pastor and who had come at dawn because a neighbor called her. Because that is what neighbors do in a county of 8,000 when something is happening at a farm they have known for 50 years. And he found Colt, who had moved from his place beside Elias's chair to the center of the room the moment Boyd walked through the door. Colt was not growling. He was sitting, his full weight settled, his yellow face angled toward Boyd, with the specific attention of a dog who has made a determination and is now simply recording. His tail was not moving. Boyd looked at the room. He looked at Frank's notepad. He looked at Cass's folder. He said with the reasonable voice, the voice that had been the voice of 3 years of incremental pressure, "I just came to see how Elias is doing." Boyd took one step toward Elias's chair. The growl from Colt was low and continuous, and entirely without excitement, the sound of a decision already rendered. The sound that had no alarm in it, because alarm implies the possibility of a different outcome. Colt did not move from the center of the room. He was between Boyd and Elias, and he was going to stay between Boyd and Elias, and the register of his body made that clear without elaboration. Boyd stopped. Elias looked at Boyd Hester from his chair with the clear, unhurried eyes of a man who has been farming this particular piece of ground for 51 years, and who knows every fence post and every ditch and every tired track on it. "I knew it was him," Elias said. 5 words, not accusation, not anger. The plain, complete statement of a fact that had been true for 2 years, and that Elias had been carrying in the particular way of a man who will not ask for help, carrying things. Frank looked up from his notepad. Cass stopped turning a page. Reverend Ada looked at Elias with the expression of a woman who had been doing pastoral visits to this farm for 3 years and had known something was wrong and had not known what, and now knew. "I knew it was him cutting the fence," Elias said. "I knew it was him diverting the ditch. I didn't say because saying meant admitting I couldn't handle my own land." He looked at his hands, which were large and scarred at the knuckles in the way of hands that have done fencing work for 50 years. Miriam would have told me to say something. She was usually right about those things. A silence. Boyd's jaw moved. He had 3 or 4 versions of events, and he was deciding which one fit this room, and none of them fit. And Dominic watched the specific moment when a man who has been methodical and patient and certain discovers that the thing he was certain of has changed. Dominic sighed. Frank has photographs of the fence line and the water ditch from the last 4 days. Cass has the extension office's documentation of the pasture damage across 3 seasons. We have a pair of yellow-handled fencing pliers pulled from your post, and we have your tire tracks in the frost at the south cut. And we have the water rights complaint that was filed 8 months ago and closed because Elias didn't call back to confirm it. He kept his voice at the working register. The register had learned on the first tour and refined on the second. Even, specific. No heat in it because heat implied a personal stake. And this was not personal. The Harney County DA has the file. Today's the day Elias makes the formal complaint. Boyd looked at Frank. Frank looked back at him with the patient expression of a man who has been waiting for a complainant for 11 months and is not in any hurry about the paperwork. Boyd's hand, at his side, went still. Colt watched Boyd leave the porch. He held his position in the center of the room until the sound of Boyd's truck on the frozen road had faded to nothing. Then it went to Elias, and he lay down across Elias's feet, and Elias put one hand on the dog's side and kept it there. Dominique sat down in the chair across from Elias. Neither of them said anything for a moment. 6 years, Elias said. 6 years, Dominique said. Elias looked at him. "Did you prove it?" Dominique thought about the question the way you think about a question that has been waiting in the dark for a long time to be answered in the light. He thought about Helmand Province, and the second tour, and the counselor in Portland, and the cabin in Burns, and Colt pressed against his side on the bad nights. "Some of it," he said. Elias nodded. "That's enough," he said. "That's how it works." Boyd Hester's equipment was seized for inspection the following week, and the fencing pliers matched. The Harney County DA filed charges for criminal mischief and water rights tampering across 3 seasons. Casa's extension documentation established the pasture damage at just over $18,000 in lost productivity. Boyd's property was assessed for the water diversion, and the ditch was restored to its original course before the spring thaw. Dominic stayed at the Cord farm through January. He told himself it was while Elias's hip healed, which was true. And it was also true that this was the best month he had had since May. He slept in the room at the top of the stairs, the one that smelled of dried lavender and oil paint. He fixed the south fence line in sections, working in the cold the way Elias had taught him to work in the cold, slowly, correctly, one post at a time, because a fence done wrong in winter fails in spring. The congregation at First Presbyterian organized a meal rotation that winter, which Elias accepted with less argument than Dominic expected, and which Dominic suspected Miriam would have been quietly delighted about. Reverend Ada came by twice a week, and Elias made coffee. And they sat at the kitchen table in the way of people who have been in each other's lives through the hard parts and have earned the comfortable silences. In February, Dominic called his mother. It was a long call. He did not give her all of it. Some of it was not yet organized enough to give, but he gave her more than he had in 2 years. And when he was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Come home soon." He said he would try. He meant it. He called his counselor on Tuesday. There are debts that we carry without accounting for them, that accrue in the years when we are too busy surviving to go back and settle. Dominique Bale owed Elias Cord 6 days of shelter and 3 meals a day, and the particular dignity of being treated when he had not been acting like one, like a man worth something. He had been carrying that debt for 6 years, and he had been slowing to 5 miles an hour on Route 4 for 8 months. And one January morning, a yellow dog stood up in the passenger seat and would not sit back down. He stopped the truck. That was the whole of it. And the whole of it was enough. This story is for every person who was helped when they didn't deserve it and didn't know how to go back. And for every Elias, every person who helped someone and never once kept score. Is there someone in your life you've been meaning to go back to? Someone who sheltered you, helped you, believed in you when you gave them no particular reason to? Tell me about them in the comments. I read every one, and this section fills with the names of people who should know they were never forgotten. Every story on this channel is about the moment someone stops the truck. If that means something to you, subscribe, so you're here for the next one. There are more stories to tell. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.